When there's any sort of complexity, you can't just sort of roll the dice and assume everybody's going to get it done properly without any discord. That needs to be really clearly disclosed for everybody's sake,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that to not do so can create a lot of difficulties.
Welcome back to Money Talks Life Lessons. I'm your co-host, Joanne Cabin, and co-founder of Isle Wealth of Raymond James. And I'm joined here today by my fabulous co-host extraordinaire, Melissa McGuire.
Hi, welcome.
Today we're talking about something near and dear to my heart, which is the family conversations that we should all have in 2026. It's a new year. I have no idea where 2025 went, but Melissa and I had a lot of conversations with clients last year around family planning, estate planning, and we thought it would be really good to talk to our listeners about some of these conversations and maybe how to approach your loved ones on some of these topics, because it can be a little bit daunting sometimes to talk about your family members, to talk to your family members about money and estate planning.
Mm-hmm. Especially when it comes to sometimes generational differences. So knowing how to bring it up when maybe the older generation still is very secretive and just believes it should be that way. So being able to sort of figure out how to arm yourself with the right questions, the right tone, the right compassion, being able to do all of that sort of stuff to sort of bring everything out into the open. So everybody knows.
Yeah, and I know we often act as a conduit for that. A lot of the times, we've been having more and more family meetings with clients, bringing in all generations and making the conversation a little bit easier as well. So I think this will be really fun today, and really enlightening as well.
Yeah, I think so. And hopefully really helpful for other people.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
All right, let's do it.
So why do you think it's such a good idea to have an episode like this so early on in 2026?
I think, you know what, now is the time for resolutions. People are, sort of more prone to making the list, getting things done. Sometimes in life, those lists and that drive and urgency seems to kind of fall off a little bit. So it's nice to get this going straight away. So it remains one of those like in the background sort of tasks or thoughts or questions sort of list as you go throughout the year. That's my
right.
thought.
And I know for us last year, we saw a lot of patterns kind of emerging with families where we were having more family meetings than ever before. And I think a lot of that has to do with the uncertainty that's in the world right now. And people are kind of thinking, what's happening to our world as a whole? And, how does that flow down to our family? And are maybe thinking a little bit more about their mortality. And there's a lot more awareness out there, too, around estate planning than there ever has been before, I think. And a lot more openness.
But there's still a missing communication piece when it comes to financial planning. And I think that doing a show like this is going to highlight sort of that part that is missing. We can do what we can do, and we can invite the families in as much as we want. And sometimes it just doesn't materialize. Sometimes we still wind up talking with people who don't know how to ask the questions, who aren't comfortable yet getting together to ask these questions. So having a show like this is for bridging that gap between coming in together, having a sort of a generational conversation all in one office versus how to get to that generational conversation, together in a home.
I think that's a benefit of also having these meetings in an office with an advisor, because that advisor can act as that prompt in the conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because they know what questions need to be asked. And then we can have, both parties or all parties in the room being able to have open dialogue. And often what we find we do is we'll ask questions on behalf of the parents and the kids, right?
That's right.
So if that's something that you feel comfortable doing with your children, to all those listeners out there, it could be a huge value add to kind of have that impartial third party in the room with you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, why don't we start, the first part of our conversation about the super fun topic of updating your wills and power of attorneys and estate documents.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Okay. So I'll ask you first, how often do you think that, a family should review a will and a power of attorney?
Well, I'm a little excessive, so I like to review mine probably every 2 years. However, you need to at least be reviewing them anytime there's any type of material change, right? So divorce, birth of a child, maybe some restructuring. So for example, if you have a business which has now been sold, or maybe you've started a business, so there's going to be key life events that are going to trigger a review, right?
Right.
However, I do think it's also important just to have a periodic review to make sure your intentions are still there. We often see wills be sometimes quite simple, where it would be, I just name my spouse, and if I'm not there, everything that's left is going to my children, right? We have these legacy wills that were created in the 60s that could still apply. But it's good to review the document every now and then to see if you want to change any of the wishes within it.
Right. And I think it's probably, even if there hasn't been a material change. So let's say, your children are grown, you write your will, and then, there might be changes and new grandchildren and all that sort of stuff. And maybe you feel like you haven't needed to update that sort of stuff, like to apply to, other generations coming within the family. But even still, there might be things that happen, 10 years later that you wouldn't really think about, right? So it's the difficulty, and you mentioned this earlier, that we might have legacy wills that might still be applicable, but so often we have those legacy wills that absolutely are not applicable anymore.
Right.
And having the conversation and looking at it, even though you can't really tell if it's out of date because nothing really has changed, but underneath sort of the sub part of the family, lots has changed, and a review is necessary. So even if there isn't anything big or major, I think every couple of years is still really important.
And I think a big piece there is the executor, right? So we all appoint an executor within our will, and we want to make sure that's still relevant because, we have people who pass away, maybe move away, maybe are not at a stage in their life where they could take on that part-time job of being an executor.
Right.
So that's always good to review and make sure that person is still able to execute the will if that should happen.
Right, exactly.
And I would think the same would apply for power of attorney, correct?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, I think so. Even if we think about jurisdictional sort of issues, what if you have a power of attorney listed and they move to, I don't know, let's say we're in BC and they move to Vernon and we're on Vancouver Island. It's going to make it a little bit tricky for that power of attorney to continue doing their job when they're in Vernon. So, we need to make sure our power of attorneys still live near us or still have the capacity to do it. Even if we have backup upon backup upon backup for our power of attorneys, we want to make sure that they all still are capable and nearby.
Right. And I guess what are some of the biggest signs that a will is out of date? I know we kind of talked about a few of these, but maybe we could elaborate on that.
I think probably for me, when even just from there's so many reasons, as we just said, there's so many reasons why a will could be out of date. But one of the biggest things for me, one of the first questions I always ask is, when was your will written? And then somebody will say, oh, it was written in 1976. That's out of date. Almost always it's going to be out of date, right? So when was the last time you reviewed your will? Oh, 1976. Okay, maybe it's time to, look at it again.
And I know there's going to be some things like you mentioned geography, right? There's each province also views changes like divorce differently, right? So I know that in Ontario, if you get divorced, your will is actually still valid. It just means that executor is different.
Right.
So whereas in other provinces, as soon as you get divorced, it's as if your will no longer exists, right? So I think we just need to be aware of some of the factors like that as well, and make sure you're understanding where you've drawn up your will and where you're living.
Well, I think it also, just as you said at the very beginning, if there's been a major change and then we say, have you updated your will? No, it's out of date. Have you've started a business or you're selling a business, and have you updated your will? No, it's out of date. There's so many for us, there's so many trigger words that, sort of linked to, it's probably out of date, in our mind. Right. So we think about those things, but sometimes it's just as simple as just a major event or it's just been too long.
Exactly. And some people, they've had grandchildren now and they want to include them in the will, right? So we just want to acknowledge the expanding family or the changes within the change in the dynamics of the family as well.
Right. So I guess we've all seen something like this. Well, you and I have in this industry, the problems that we could see when old documents remain in place for too long. What do you think are some of the problems?
Yeah, I mean, what I think of most recently is we've had a situation where there was an estate and there was multiple variations of the will, like multiple wills, right? All written, within close proximity of each other. And so finding the validity of that will and having old documents laying around where they kept all those old variations of the will created a lot of confusion.
No kidding.
For the executor. So much so that the estate has been drawn out for several years, right? Because it's being contested by different parties.
Right.
So I would say one of the biggest things is that if you draw up a new will, destroy the old versions because that can hold up estates huge.
Right. I think we've seen this too, that, things change for people as they age, right? They start leaning on one family member, one child a little bit more. And what seemed like a really fair distribution of assets before maybe suddenly isn't so fair anymore and it might be in the eye of the child who's been looking after the person. Or it's in the eye of the parent who's looking at this one child looking after them, right? And it's their will still says one thing, even distribution of assets, which is this is a tricky slope, isn't it? Boy.
It is a tricky slope because you're talking about distributing assets equally between children, which in theory is a great concept. But a lot of times I think to what you're trying to say is parents might say, hey, I want to give the child that's been around and more present and taking on this extra role, maybe a little bit more compensation.
Right. And that is where a conversation needs to be had and not just sort of, sitting with the same will for ever and ever and ever, expressing different desires verbally and not changing the will or updating that. It just sort of helps to avoid family discord later on. And
and we've seen that a lot. And I think a lot of things that can be solved with that is a letter in the will and some basic math behind it. Because, a lot of the times siblings who maybe, let's say they live in different provinces or maybe they're just not as engaged with their parents. If there's an explanation around it saying, look, I've had this child that's lived near to me. They've taken me to all the doctor's appointments, time off work, done X, Y, Z. There's a number behind that, right, of their time. Right. And so as long as you can justify that, that might be a way to set you up for more success with having that conversation down the road. But we've seen it on way too many cases where they said, I'm trying to leave the one child a lot more money and the other one not so much. And that is going to be leaving a lot of conflict behind for the remaining children that was all created from the parents.
Right. Yeah.
And that, I think that would be a hard slope to get out of.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, because I'm sure there'd be a lot of resentment.
And probably a little bit of guilt too.
Yeah.
Maybe one child is there helping you out because the other one wasn't given a choice, right? And they just naturally said, well, you live closer to me, so we're going to make you this person. But what if the other child wanted to move closer and wanted to be part of that, just didn't know it was that time? Yeah. Right? There might be that dynamic too.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a tricky situation, right? And we're going to see so many different family dynamics. And sometimes children do not have the ability to live close to their parents to help them. So it's one of those things where, you know what, they have a career that's taken them somewhere else. Maybe they've got married and moved with a spouse and they're building a life somewhere else. And they physically cannot be there every day like that other sibling can.
Right.
But does that mean that they're not entitled to their fair share either, right?
Or at least a conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest barrier to this is communication.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times I've seen a situation with a client of ours recently where there was open communication. They said to their one child who was there with them, we are leaving $100,000 extra in the will for so-and-so because of this. And the whole family knew about it, though. It was a full-on conversation that everyone agreed upon that number and knew the rationale behind it.
Mm.
And I can tell you, even after the passing of the parents, it was still a little bit of a point of contention.
Mm.
But overall, the family was able to move past it because everyone was in the know and it wasn't a secret.
Right. We're talking about sort of even distribution of assets, different things that could come along. But then always there's the age-old question of who should somebody choose as their executor or power of attorney. And you may have people in the family that just absolutely want to do it and fight over the option. Or you have people like me who say no. Do I do it? No. Whatever. But what should we think about when choosing this?
Yeah, I think it should be, again, another family meeting topic if possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, or if you're not going to have a family meeting, you should appoint all children equally. Some of the language that we've seen when we review the wills is a lot of people will name all their children, but they use a language that says and in there. So it says, I appoint Joanne, Melissa, and Clinton as my executors.
Right.
But what that means when they use the words and is that we all must agree and act together, which can be very challenging depending on people's life, involvement, opinions.
Location.
Exactly. Yeah. So, one of the things we review when we're looking at wills for clients is that language. And if it says and, or if it says and or, because if it says and or, it generally means that one of those three is listed, could act on behalf of the parents. It does not have to be a unified acting.
Yeah. I often when we see those, it's like sort of an immediate flag for us to we'd hone in a little bit more looking at it. Sometimes the following paragraph says they may act independently. So I sort of breathe a sigh of relief. It might be like Joanne, Melissa, and Clinton to act blah, 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 blah. And then the next paragraph, they may act independently for all things.
Which is key.
Which is like so important because that and that's in there causes a little bit of a hiccup for me when I read it. I'm like, uh-oh. And then the next paragraph, I'm like, okay. Whew.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, I mean, we had an episode earlier with a trust company just talking about the benefits of using those services as well, because trust companies can act as an impartial professional service to remove the family dynamic altogether. We've seen so many blended families and tricky situations where it can be really hard to name one person as an executor.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of different emotions that come up with that. So, I would encourage our listeners to listen to our trust episode where we interviewed a lawyer named Samantha Russell and went through all the benefits of having a trust company because it removes the emotion. And they're there to act out all the wishes of your will, removing the family dynamic from it.
I'm a firm believer that anger is the next closest and easiest to get to emotion from sadness, right? It's so often, you'll see families, so often we've seen families completely explode when it comes to money, right? Like their loved one had their parent or their parents have now both passed away. And then it's just anger and blame and resentment and whatever. It can go on and on and on. And then you throw money in that and oh my gosh, it can get really ugly. And it's actually, I hope that my children don't have any anger or blame and resentment and whatever by the time I pass away, but I've already set up a trust service for my will. Because I'm like, there's no way, I've seen it happen too many times. I want that burden to be removed from my kids and my family.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in that too. And I don't want to put Matthew through all of that, right? Like I don't want him, it might not be his cup of tea, right? There's a lot to, taking care of someone's estate.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially when you have businesses and things involved, right? Yeah. Like you need to have a level of expertise. Like we do this for a living and it would be challenging for us to do it, right? And we have the resources and the knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. I think that this goes really right into sort of our next idea of why is capability more important than convenience?
Yeah, it is very convenient to name your children. We think, well, they're our next of kin. We should just name them, right? But some people just don't have the capability. We always joke with each other about math. And it's like if you have, maybe a family member that you've named as executor, but numbers are not their thing. Organization is not their thing.
Right.
You have to be so timely and administratively organized
Yeah.
that if you can't keep track and properly document all of your actions and steps, if there's multiple beneficiaries, it's an issue because they can hold your feet to the fire and say, where is all this reporting, right? So we have to make sure that the person you're leaving this to is capable, not just from a interest standpoint, but also they even have the time, right? Like right now, if I had to be an executor with everything on my plate, running a business, having a family, there is no way I would be able to do justice. Like this estate would be dragged on for years because I just don't have the time.
Yep. And then throw in some tough family dynamics and...
No thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm out. I don't know what the kids do now, and they put like their thumb on a table, but that would be me, and it's like the person that's left.
It's not the nose anymore?
Oh yeah, there's so many different ones. Okay, Melissa, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
How many families actually tell people where their documents are, their legal documents?
Okay, I don't know the actual answer to this, but I would say very few. Very few. There's actually like... this question is a huge deal to me. Like Doug and I, my husband, recently we went on our very first trip alone, like last year. We went to South Africa for a few weeks, right? And it was a big deal to me. We were getting on a plane. We were leaving together. We needed some updates done to our wills. I was like really worked up and upset about it, but we got all that sort of stuff done because there was a deadline that I had before we were to get on the plane. But even before we have a place where we keep our wills, our power of attorneys. We've got it all sorted. But I specifically called up the place and said, "This is where I'm keeping them now. This is exactly where they are." For where we're keeping them now. And it was a really big deal. Like, if you're going to need my power of attorney, this is where it is. If you're going to need whatever, this is where it is. And it's just because I was getting on an airplane with my husband and flying out of the country. But I thought, oh my gosh, if suddenly everybody has to wonder where the documents are, they don't know my hidey places. Like, no. Nobody knows where I keep things. So it was a big deal for me to make sure I disclosed that.
Yeah, I mean... I've heard so many stories from clients who were like farmers back in the day, and they would literally hide documents in like cans, in their yard.
Yeah.
So you need like I feel like I would be like Captain Hook, like with my treasure map, like walking around looking for that X in the ground. But that's literally what they do, right? Yeah. So unless you're telling somebody, there's been times where people have passed away and they have not located the will, and they had to find it in some obscure place many years later, right? So it's just so important for people to let people know where those documents are. Yeah. Because if you can't find them, it's as if you have none and you've died intestate and you do not, and now you have to have, someone apply to the courts to be your executor, and it draws out everything so much longer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Everyone thought I was being a bit excessive, but that's okay.
Oh no, that's
this is what makes me happy, and this is what I'm gonna do.
No, that's why I did my will in the first place was, or my update once, because I didn't do an update until after Matthew was born. It was once we were going on our first trip without him. That triggered me as well. Yeah. I have a big folder where all of our information is. So like if something happened to me, for example, he would know what to do, and vice versa if we're both gone. Right. So what should people keep in a family financial binder, folder that would make their kids' lives a lot easier, or whoever their executor is?
Sort of everything you can think of. Everything from your statements of your investable assets or bank accounts or wherever it is. Some people have like 25 banks and whatever, as long as everybody knows a way that your family would know where everything is if they have to pull everything together at a short notice. It could be all of your liabilities. It could be your insurance. It could be your, property insurance. It could be all of the stuff that somehow is like financially important. But I'd even go as far as to say that, these things are important to me. Like, information about, what do you want your funeral or your wake or your celebration of life to look like? Mm-hmm. For me, it's even as important as what music is going to be important. Right. So those sorts of things, if there's something special you wanted to have imparted, or let's say you're a writer and you want to have a certain thing written or read at a certain time, like all of that kind of stuff, just so that it's easy for people to tidy up for you when it's needed and then move forward in a way that is shown that is your way of wanting to do that.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I want to touch on, which ties nicely to what you just said, is something that we've developed over the years for our clients. We call it the wealth map. I've talked about it in another podcast, but I'm going to talk about it again because other than taxes is something I live and breathe every day, is this financial one-pager where we list all of our clients' assets, properties, businesses, and then what is even more important, we list their team. Their professional team. And so that's going to be people like us, their accountants, their lawyers, their insurance agents, their bankers, right? So if they have a contact at the bank, their trusted contact person. So if we couldn't find them, actually, it's funny, our business partner, David, he always talks about, if people were beamed up by aliens, who would we go to be like, are they missing or where are they? Are they in Mexico? Did the aliens got them? I don't know, right? So we have a person that we don't share financial information with, but that we could contact to say, hey, have you seen Melissa and Doug? Like, we've been trying to reach out to them, but we don't know where they are.
Right.
So we capture all of that information, and we've had clients, their executors actually bring us these one-pagers and say, this was in here and was said to come to you.
Exactly.
And so they come to us and we help them through the next steps of saying, okay, did they have it? They had insurance. They had a car loan. Like, let's start looking through these things, right? Because you need to list all those things because there's a lot of different line items that they need to deal with.
Exactly.
I know we kind of talked a little bit about this already, but how does just knowing where the documents are reduce stress during major life events?
I think that, gosh, it's more of a feeling for me. Like it's a hard thing to put into words, but just having the comfort of certainty, I think, is when things are upended and you absolutely don't have to question that part. When those documents that are needed to sort of smooth out what has happened, I think that to me, it's the comfort and the certainty and the for sure knowing, and you don't have to question when everything's in question at that time is why it's important to me.
Okay.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about, the paper, the everything list, the binder, the wills, the executor, but let's talk about digital assets now and online accounts.
Yeah, I think that's such a important conversation to have because so many people, myself included, I'm the only one that knows the password on how to get into some of these accounts, right? And so if something happens to me, let's use Facebook as an example because they've actually done something really incredible with Facebook. It was actually stemmed from a situation where there was a young child, teenager that passed away, and he had a Facebook account, but nobody knew his password. So every year it would keep saying, oh, it's so-and-so's birthday. Right. And it would come on the family and all of their friends' accounts because no one could shut this account down because they didn't have his password. And even though he passed away and the parents could say, hey, I have these legal documents and things, they couldn't grant them access into the account.
Right.
So, they kept seeing this every single year. So what they've now done is they've added a feature for a legacy person contact so that if you pass away, they can grant someone access to the account to be able to shut it down.
Right.
So I think this is really important for people who have these social media sites where that's an option. Go in there and name someone. Name your spouse for now, right?
Right.
Then you can change it to children if something happens, right? Or whoever you want to appoint.
If you're not married, make it your parents or a trusted adult,
or a friend,
right? Yeah.
Right? Just name somebody because I know in that situation, it was very hard for them to keep getting these constant reminder and they could never do anything about it. Right. So that's one good feature now that's out there. And then there's always those people who, and I'm not going to advise anybody to do this, that have access to it somehow. I'm doing my compliance air quotes, that, there is a way to get into that account so that you could deactivate it. Right. If you wanted to.
Right. So given all that we were just talking about in terms of digital assets, why do you think digital instructions are, becoming more essential in estate planning? Because I know whenever I'm preparing people for going in to see a lawyer or a notary or something to start thinking about their estate assets, it's always the digital aspect that we remind them of too, to be prepared to chat about.
Yeah, it's so important. So many people live and breathe online nowadays.
Yeah.
Like I get my tax returns through the CRA My account. Everything's online, right? Gone are the days where you have the filing cabinet for every year's pay stub and things. Like I used to do that. I recently went through the exercise of shredding everything, right? Because you have it all digital now. So I think we're so online now that we have to keep track of all these different accounts. And then the youth coming up now are even more online with TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. Like people live online, and maybe even to the point I was just talking about, family members might want access to those photos.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And things like that. So I think it's really important to be thinking a little bit about who has access to your account in the event of.
Yeah. Well, this is actually quite a lengthy conversation. I don't think we anticipated that we'd have so much to say or there'd be so many questions. So why don't we just pause here and we'll pick this up again in part 2 of this episode.
As always, please check us out at islewealth.ca, follow us on Spotify, or subscribe on YouTube.
Thanks so much for listening and watching.
Bye for now.
Corporate disclaimer. This podcast has been prepared by and with expressed opinions of Joanne Cabin and Melissa McGuire, and are not necessarily the opinions of Raymond James Ltd., RJL. Statistics, data, and other information presented are from sources RJL believes to be reliable, but their accuracy cannot be guaranteed. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of securities. Investors considering any investment should consult their investment advisor to ensure that it is suitable for the investor's circumstances and risk tolerance before making an investment decision. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Information provided in this podcast is general in nature and should not be construed as providing legal, accounting, and/or tax advice. Should viewers have any specific questions and/or issues in these areas, please consult a legal, tax, and/or accounting advisor. RJL is a member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund. Raymond James USA Ltd. advisors may only conduct business with residents of the states and/or jurisdictions in which they are properly registered. Raymond James USA Limited is a member of FINRA and SIPC. We hope you enjoyed the podcast, and for more information, please visit islewealth.ca.